She only meant to text her brother, but her fingers were shaking, blood was blurring the screen, and that message landed in the hands of the most dangerous man in the city. 15 minutes later, her apartment door exploded off its hinges, and the man the entire underworld feared walked in. If you want to know what happens next, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The first thing Serena Vale noticed when she regained consciousness was the smell. Stale beer soaked into carpet that hadn't been cleaned in months. Cigarette smoke embedded so deep into the walls it had become part of the building's DNA. And underneath all of it, something copper and warm that she recognized after a moment as her own blood. She was on the floor of the kitchen. She knew this because her cheek was pressed against the cracked linoleum, the kind with a faded yellow pattern that had probably looked cheerful in 1987 and now looked like a crime scene prop. The refrigerator hummed 3 feet from her face. Someone had left a pizza box on top of it, and a corner of the cardboard hung over the edge like it was thinking about jumping. Serena tried to breathe and felt it immediately. That grinding, scraping sensation on her left side that meant something in there was broken. Not bruised. Broken. She'd had bruised ribs before, and she knew the difference. This was different. This was the kind of pain that made her vision go gray at the edges when she tried to pull air into her lungs. The kind that said, if you move wrong, you're going to scream, and you will not be able to stop. She didn't scream. She'd learned not to scream a long time ago. Screaming made him angrier. Marcus was somewhere behind her. She could hear him, the specific rhythm of his breathing when he was drunk past the point of coordination, but not yet past the point of consciousness. Heavy and irregular, punctuated by those little hitching sounds that meant he was on the couch, half passed out, the way he always ended up after he went this far. Like his body knew it had exceeded some invisible threshold and was filing away the damage for later review. She gave herself 30 seconds, just lying there. 30 seconds to take inventory. Left side, broken ribs, at least 2, possibly 3. Right knee, throbbing badly but functional. Face. Her lower lip was split. She could feel it swollen and sticky, and her left eye felt tight in a way that meant by morning it would be swollen shut. Both palms scraped raw from when she'd hit the floor the first time, before she'd stopped trying to catch herself because catching herself just made her wrists hurt and didn't stop anything anyway. 30 seconds. Then she started moving. It took her nearly 4 minutes to get from the kitchen floor to her hands and knees. She knew this because she was watching the microwave clock, using it to pace herself, one small movement every time the minute changed. She'd discovered this trick about 8 months ago. Breaking movement into time increments kept her from rushing, and rushing caused mistakes, and mistakes caused noise, and noise woke him up. Her phone was on the counter. She could see it from where she was, propped against the backsplash next to a half-empty bottle of hot sauce and a coffee mug Marcus had been using as an ashtray. She needed to get to it without making a sound, without knocking anything over, without letting the floorboards creak under the wrong pressure point. She'd mapped this apartment so many times in her head she could have navigated it blindfolded. 3rd floorboard from the refrigerator, skip it entirely. The loose cabinet handle near the stove, don't touch it. The chair at the small 2-person table, one leg was shorter than the others, and it rattled against the floor if you brushed it. She knew all of this the way soldiers knew minefields. She reached the counter, grabbed the edge with both hands, which screamed at her from the scraped palms, and pulled herself upright in one motion because doing it slowly would have been worse. She bit down on the inside of her cheek, tasted more blood. Stood there for a moment with her forehead resting against the cabinet door above the counter, breathing in tiny, controlled sips, waiting for the gray at the edges of her vision to clear. It mostly cleared. She took the phone. She needed to call Daniel. Her brother, her older brother, who lived 40 minutes away in the East Side apartment he shared with his girlfriend, who had told Serena approximately 6 times in the last year that she could come stay with them, who had offered to drive over and get her, who had left that offer open even after she'd rejected it every single time because she kept telling herself things were going to get better. Marcus was going to get better. She just needed to be patient. She just needed to be smarter about how she handled him. She just needed to stop doing the things that set him off. She knew how that sounded. She'd known for a while how that sounded. She pulled up Daniel's contact. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she missed the first tap entirely, her finger sliding across the screen and pulling up the phone keypad instead. She switched back to contacts. Found Daniel's name. Tap the message icon. She didn't call because if Marcus woke up and heard her voice, the situation would reset immediately. And she didn't know if her body could absorb another reset tonight. A text was quieter. A text could be read and understood and responded to without a single sound. She typed as carefully as she could. Marcus hurt me bad. Ribs. I need you to come. Please come now. Don't call. Her thumb hovered over the send button. From the living room, Marcus made a wet snoring sound and shifted his weight on the couch. The springs groaned. Serena stopped breathing entirely. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The snoring resumed. She hit send. Then she lowered herself to the floor again because standing was costing her more than she had left to spend. And she sat with her back against the cabinet doors and her knees drawn up as much as her ribs would allow. And she held the phone in both hands and watched the screen. The message showed as delivered. She waited. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 8. No response, which was strange. Daniel kept his phone on the nightstand. He'd told her that specifically after the last bad incident 6 months ago. I keep it right there. You call me, day or night, I'll hear it. But that had been a call. A text was different. Maybe he was in the bathroom. Maybe his girlfriend had his phone. Maybe... The phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it. But it wasn't a response. It was an error notification. A small red exclamation mark next to the message she'd just sent. And below it, the carrier's automated text. Message delivery failed. Invalid number. Serena stared at it. She looked at Daniel's contact, then at the message thread. And she realized, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the pain, that she hadn't sent that message to Daniel at all. The keyboard had auto-corrected the number, or she'd mistapped in the contacts list, or the shaking in her hands had done something she hadn't noticed. Whatever the cause, the number at the top of the message thread was not her brother's number. She didn't recognize it at all. Her first instinct was to type a follow-up message, wrong number, sorry. The automatic social reflex. She almost did it. Her thumb was already moving toward the keyboard when she stopped herself, because that was a terrible idea. She didn't know whose number this was. She didn't need to invite a conversation with a stranger at 11:30 at night while she was bleeding on her kitchen floor. She needed to fix the original problem and contact Daniel through a different method. She went back to contacts, found Daniel's entry, checked the number manually this time, digit by digit, and then she tried to send the message again to the correct number. Message delivery failed. She tried twice more. Same result. The network was down, or her signal was, or something between her phone and her brother's phone was broken in a way she couldn't fix from a kitchen floor. She thought about calling instead and decided the risk was worth it, because Marcus was deep enough under that he might sleep through it if she kept her voice to barely a whisper. She was about to dial when the phone buzzed in her hand. Not a notification, an incoming message. From the unknown number. Who gave you this number? Not a question. Not who is this or wrong number. Just a flat statement disguised as a question, delivered with the particular tone of someone who was accustomed to getting answers rather than asking for them. Serena almost laughed, which would have made her ribs explode, so she didn't. She typed back the only honest answer available to her at the moment. I have no idea. I was trying to reach my brother. Wrong number. Sorry. She set the phone down and went back to trying to reach Daniel through the app. His social media, the backup number he'd given her once that she wasn't sure was still active. She was mid-message when the unknown number responded again. You said someone hurt you. She went still. Right. The message she'd sent before realizing the number was wrong. The message she'd sent to this stranger by accident, the one that read, Marcus hurt me bad. Ribs, I need you to come. She thought about denying it, saying she'd been exaggerating, or that it was a joke, or that things were fine now. She thought about all the times she'd said versions of those things to people who'd noticed the bruises, or the flinching, or the way she held herself when she walked sometimes, like she was carrying something fragile inside her chest. She typed, It's fine, I've got it handled. Sorry for the wrong text. The response came back in under 10 seconds. Address. Just that. One word. Address? Serena stared at it for a long time. From the living room, Marcus snored on, oblivious and heavy. 300 pounds of volatile drunk sprawled across a couch that had come with the apartment and that Serena had always hated. She looked at the message. She looked at the dark hallway that led to the living room, visible around the edge of the counter. She looked at her own hand, still shaking, palms raw, knuckles dark with dried blood that wasn't only hers. She typed her address. She didn't know why. She would ask herself that question for a long time afterward, and she would never find a satisfying answer. Maybe it was the loss of blood. Maybe it was the particular flatness of that one-word command, the way it had sounded like a statement of fact rather than a request, the way it had implied that address was merely information being gathered, that action was already in motion, and the address was simply a required coordinate. Maybe she was just tired in a way that went past her body into something else entirely, something that had been running on fumes for months and had finally decided to stop pretending. She sent the address. Then she sat on the floor and waited and told herself nothing was going to happen. The stranger was going to respond with something useless or nothing at all, and she was going to get off this floor and find a way to reach Daniel and get out of this apartment before Marcus woke up. She made it to nothing at all before the front door came off its hinges. Not a knock, not a buzzer, not any of the sounds that preceded normal human entry into a residential space. The door simply ceased to exist as a barrier. There was a single impact that Serena felt more than heard, a concussive pressure that traveled through the floor and up through her spine, and then the door was open and two men she had never seen in her life were inside the apartment. The first one she barely registered. He moved fast and stayed low and went directly toward the sound of Marcus's snoring without hesitating, without looking around, without acknowledging that she was sitting on the kitchen floor 6 feet away. He had the focused, economical movement of someone performing a task they had performed many times. The second one she registered completely. He stood in the doorway, or where the doorway had been, for one moment, and that one moment was enough. Tall, not in a theatrical way, but in the way of someone who had simply grown up with height and wore it without awareness. Dark suit that had cost more than Serena's monthly rent, which under the circumstances was almost funny. Dark hair, slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been in the middle of something else when the message arrived. Sharp features that were attractive in the aggressive, uncomfortable way of things designed to cut. He wasn't holding a weapon. She noticed that. His hands were at his sides, empty, relaxed, and somehow that was more frightening than if he had been pointing something at her. His eyes found her on the floor immediately. They were very dark and very still, and they moved over her. Not in the way men usually looked at her, assessing what they wanted, but in a different way entirely, the way someone looks at the aftermath of something and calculates what it means. He said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then from the living room there was a sound, something heavy, meeting something harder, a truncated shout, and then a very specific silence that Serena recognized as the silence of someone no longer being conscious. The man in the doorway still didn't look away from her. "Can you stand?" he said. It wasn't a question either. She was beginning to understand that this person didn't ask questions. He collected information. "I don't know," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected, scraped raw from the inside. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, crouched down to her level without any visible hesitation about the floor or the blood on it or any of the other details that would have given a normal person pause, and looked at her with those still dark eyes from a distance of about 2 feet. "Left side," she said, because he was looking at the way she was holding her arm against her ribs. "At least 2 broken. Face," he said. "I know." He reached out and she flinched. She couldn't stop it. It was automatic, her body's most fundamental learned response. And something shifted very briefly in his expression. Not pity, not sympathy, something colder and more precise, like an accountant revising a number upward. He didn't touch her face. He held his hand still for a moment, palm up, an offering rather than a demand, and waited. She looked at his hand, then she took it. He got her off the floor in one smooth motion, taking most of her weight without comment, positioning his arm along her back in a way that carefully avoided her left side. She ended up standing, which was worse in some ways. The pain hit differently vertical, gravity doing things to her ribs that lying down had prevented, and she gripped his arm with both hands until the gray cleared again. "Slow breath," he said. "I know how to breathe," she said. "Then do it." She did. It helped marginally. The other man appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, built wide across the shoulders with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something industrial. He looked at Serena, then at the man holding her upright, then said in a low voice, "He's out. What do you want to do with him?" The question hung in the air. Serena didn't look at the man beside her. She looked at the wall. She could feel his stillness more than see it. The particular quality of someone who had already arrived at a conclusion before the conversation began. "Not here," the man said. To her, "Not the other one." "Can you walk to the elevator?" She thought about it honestly. "Maybe?" "Then let's find out." His name, she learned an hour later, sitting in the back of a car with tinted windows that was moving through streets she didn't recognize at a speed that suggested traffic laws were considered suggestions, was Damien Voss. The younger man's name was Ronan Cade, and he drove with the precise, unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing it professionally for years, adjusting the route 3 times in ways that seemed random to her, but clearly weren't. Damien had said very little during the ride. He sat next to her, not touching her, maintaining exactly the right amount of distance for someone who was monitoring her condition without hovering over it. He'd produced a first aid kit from somewhere under the seat, a serious one, not the gas station variety, and had offered it to her without suggesting she use it, which she'd appreciated, because she'd been dealing with her own injuries for long enough to know what needed immediate attention and what could wait. She'd cleaned the cuts, wrapped the knee, done nothing about the ribs because there was nothing to do about ribs except breathe carefully and hate your life. "Where are we going?" she said, not her first time asking. "Somewhere safe," he said, not his first time answering with that. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you need right now." She wanted to argue with that and couldn't quite muster the energy, so she turned and looked out the window instead. The city slid past. She'd lived here her whole life, and she'd never seen these streets from this angle, from inside a car like this, at this hour. Everything looked different from the right elevation and the right distance. Everything looked like it could be something else entirely. "Marcus?" she said. Damien didn't answer immediately. "Is he—" She stopped, restarted. "What happened to him?" "He's being handled. I need to know if he's alive," Damien said. And there was something in the inflection of that sentence, a very specific weight on the word alive, that told her a considerable amount about the nature of the handling involved. She sat with that for a moment. "He'll come after me," she said. "When he wakes up, he won't." 2 words, the same tone as everything else he said. Flat and absolutely certain, the tone of a man who had made things happen through sheer force of decided will so many times that doubt had simply stopped being a functional concept in his internal vocabulary. Serena watched him from the side. He was looking forward, posture straight, hands resting on his thighs. The city light moved across his face in fragments. A second of brightness, then shadow, then brightness again. And she had the unsettling sensation that she was reading someone in a language she didn't fully speak, catching 1 word in 5 and missing the rest entirely. "I don't know you," she said. "No." "I don't know why you came." He turned and looked at her then, just briefly. "Because you sent a message saying you needed help." "You don't know me either." "No," he said again. "So why—" "Get some rest," he said. "We're 20 minutes out." She didn't get some rest. She kept her eyes open and watched the city and tried to assemble what she knew into something that made sense. A message sent to the wrong number. A man who had arrived with backup in under 15 minutes, which meant he'd been close, which meant he operated in this part of the city regularly, which told her something. A man in a suit like that, with a car like this, with an enforcer named Ronan, who moved through the aftermath of violence the way most people move through a grocery store. The particular way he'd said he's being handled. She knew, in the broad strokes, what kind of man this was. She wasn't sure yet whether that should terrify her more than the situation she'd just left. The car stopped at a building she recognized from the skyline, one of those towers near the financial district that were visible from most of the city on clear days, the kind of building that existed in a different economic atmosphere than anything she'd ever been inside. Ronan pulled into an underground garage, and they took a private elevator that required a key card that Damien produced from inside his jacket. The penthouse was this kind of space that Serena associated with magazine spreads and movie sets. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, the city spread below like a circuit board lit up and humming. Furniture that was minimal and precise and clearly expensive without being showy about it. A kitchen that was probably better equipped than most restaurants she'd been to, though she doubted it got much use. It was also, she noticed, completely impersonal. No photographs, no clutter, nothing on the counters that suggested someone lived here rather than passed through. "Bathroom's through there," Damien said, gesturing toward a hallway. "Second door on the right. There are clothes in the closet. Not yours, but they'll fit better than what you have on. Someone will bring food. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You lost blood." She looked at him. He was standing near the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. Not at her. Already on to the next thing in his mind, whatever that was. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He didn't answer for a long moment. When he did, he didn't turn around. "The man you were living with," he said. "His name isn't really Marcus Cole." She blinked. "His real name is Marco Reyes," Damien continued, still looking at the city. "He's been operating as a low-level courier for the Ortega Syndicate for the last 3 years. Running money, running messages, nothing that put him on anyone's radar at a significant level." A pause. "Until approximately 6 weeks ago, when a substantial amount of syndicate funds went missing during a transfer he was supposed to facilitate." Serena stared at the back of his head. What is that?" "The Ortega organization believes he either stole the money or knows where it went." He turned then, just slightly, enough that she could see his profile. When he failed to produce it on their timeline, they started asking questions, which means they started asking questions about everyone around him. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "They think I know something," she said. "They will," Damien said. "By tomorrow morning, yes." "I don't know anything. I didn't even know his real name." "I know that." "Then it doesn't matter what's true," he said, and he looked at her fully now, and there was something in his expression that wasn't unkind but was absolutely without softness. The look of someone presenting facts, not comfort. "What matters is what they believe. And they will believe that a woman who lived with Marco Reyes for 8 months and shared his apartment and presumably had access to his communications is a lead worth following." She sat down on the arm of the nearest couch because her legs were no longer entirely reliable. "How long have you known about him?" she said. "The Reyes connection? About a week. We've been monitoring Ortega movement in this area for longer than that." "And you knew where he lived?" "Yes." "So you knew where I lived?" A beat. "Yes." She thought about what that meant. She thought about the message she'd sent, the wrong number, the 15-minute response time. She thought about what Damien had just told her, about Marco Reyes and the missing money, and the organization that was now going to come looking for answers from anyone connected to him. "If I hadn't sent that text," she said slowly, "We would have moved on him within 48 hours, Damien said. "The circumstances changed the timeline." "Because of me." He didn't answer that, which was an answer. She sat with it all settling around her, the weight of it, the particular shape of what had just happened to her life. She'd walked into this apartment, been brought into this apartment, as the accidental recipient of a stranger's intervention. She was leaving behind a broken door and a man who'd been calling himself Marcus Cole, and apparently a connection to a criminal organization that now had reasons to consider her a loose end. "I want to call my brother," she said. "Not yet. He'll be worried. If you call him, they may track it. I need 24 hours before you make any outside contact." "You need," she repeated. He held her gaze steadily. "If you want to stay ahead of the people who are going to come looking for you, yes. I need 24 hours. Serena looked at him for a long time. She looked at the city behind him, the lights, the dark spaces between the lights. She thought about Daniel waiting for a text back that hadn't come, probably asleep by now, not yet worried. She thought about the apartment floor, the microwave clock, the inventory of damage she'd taken before she'd started moving. She thought about the way Damien had held out his hand palm up and waited. 24 hours, she said. Yes. And then I can leave. He looked at her with those still dark eyes and said, that depends on what the next 24 hours look like. She didn't like that answer. But she was 26 years old and she'd been living with a man she didn't actually know for 8 months. And she'd learned, somewhere along the way, to recognize the difference between a lie designed to make her feel better and the truth designed to prepare her for what was coming. Damien Voss, she was beginning to understand, dealt exclusively in the second kind. She went to find the bathroom. She cleaned herself up properly, which took longer than she wanted it to and hurt more than she could have anticipated. She found the clothes in the closet, plain, dark, her size in a way that felt slightly too precise. And she changed into them and folded her ruined shirt into a small rectangle the way her mother had taught her and left it on the shelf. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at her had a split lip, a swelling eye, scrape marks across both cheekbones, and the hollow, slightly dissociated look of someone whose nervous system was still catching up with the last 2 hours. She was 26, but she looked older than that tonight. She looked like someone who'd been through something and come out the other side and hadn't yet decided what to do with the fact of having come out. She turned off the light. She came back out to find Damien still at the windows, phone to his ear, speaking in a voice too low to hear across the room. Ronan was gone. There was food on the kitchen counter, something warm, something that smelled like actual cooking rather than delivery, which raised questions she didn't have the bandwidth to pursue. She sat at the kitchen counter and ate because he was right. She had lost blood, and her body was going to need something to work with. She ate mechanically and without pleasure and watched Damien at the window. His reflection doubled in the glass, the city behind him. He ended the call, stood there for a moment. Then he said, without turning around, "You should sleep." "I won't." "Try anyway." She looked at the city. She thought about Marco, waking up somewhere, in whatever condition Damien's people had left him in, and realizing she was gone. She thought about the Ortega Syndicate, a name she'd never heard before tonight, and what it meant that they were now aware of her existence. She thought about 24 hours. "Tell me one thing," she said. He turned. "Are you going to keep me here against my will?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "You'd let me walk out that door right now?" "Yes. Even knowing what you just told me about the cartel." "You're not my prisoner," he said. "You're not my responsibility either, not technically. You sent a message to the wrong number and I made a choice. That's the full extent of what exists between us. If you want to leave, there's the elevator." She looked at the elevator. She looked at him. "But you think I'd be dead within a week," she said. Something moved across his face, very briefly. "I think the probability is high," he said. "Yes?" Serena turned back to the counter, looked at the food she'd been eating, thought about the kind of calculation involved in choosing between a danger she understood and a danger she didn't, between the devil she'd known and the one she'd dialed by accident. She finished eating. She found the bedroom, the one that was clearly meant for guests, blank and clean and impersonal in the same way as the rest of the apartment. And she lay down on top of the covers, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Her ribs ground together every time she breathed. She breathed anyway. Somewhere in the apartment, she could hear Damien on the phone again, his voice a low frequency she couldn't decode from this distance, talking about things she didn't have context for yet. She listened to the tone of it, flat, certain, deliberate, and she thought about what he'd said. "You're not my responsibility. Not technically. Not technically." She was still thinking about those two words when she heard it, a sound from somewhere outside, below, the particular quality of a disturbance at street level that traveled up through 40 floors of steel and glass and reached her as something barely audible, something she might have dismissed as traffic or wind, except that Damien's voice stopped mid-sentence. Complete silence. Then his footsteps, quick and deliberate, moving toward the windows. Then, "Ronan," into the phone, sharp. "We have a problem." Serena sat up in the dark. Whatever 24 hours was supposed to give them, it was already gone. Serena was off the bed before she fully understood why. It was the silence that did it. Not the sound from outside, not even Damien's voice cutting off mid-sentence, but the specific quality of the silence that followed. The kind that had a shape to it, a pressure, the kind she'd learned to read in a different context entirely. The silence before Marcus's hand moved. The silence that meant something had already been decided, and the only variable left was how bad it was going to be. She was in the hallway before she'd made a conscious decision to move. Damien was at the far window, phone pressed hard against his ear, and he'd gone very still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. His usual stillness was controlled. This was the stillness of someone processing incoming information and not liking the shape of it at all. Ronan's voice was audible from the phone, tinny and compressed, saying something clipped and fast that Serena couldn't make out. "How many?" Damien said. "A beat." "How many, Ronan?" She could hear Ronan's answer from where she was standing. 3 words. She didn't catch all 3, but she caught the last one, which was minimum, and she caught the number that preceded it, which was 4. Damien turned from the window. He saw her in the hallway, and something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like a rapid recalibration, the mental equivalent of redrawing a map on the fly. "Get dressed," he said. "Shoes on. Leave everything else." "I am dressed." He looked at her, registered the clothes, the bare feet. "Shoes? I don't have shoes. Mine are back at—" He was already moving toward the hallway closet, pulling it open, scanning the interior with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what was in there and was finding the fastest path to the relevant items. He pulled out a pair of boots, women's, dark, roughly her size, and set them on the floor in front of her without breaking stride. "Who's outside?" she said, sitting down on the hallway floor to pull them on. "People asking questions we don't have time to answer. The cartel. Surveillance. Possibly advanced scouts." He was back at the window, keeping to the side of the glass now, not standing directly in front of it. "They're faster than I expected. You said we had 24 hours. I said that's what I needed." He glanced at her. "I didn't say the other side agreed." She tied the boots. They were half a size too big, and she could feel it immediately, the slight slip at the heel. She tied them tighter and stood up and decided half a size was a problem for later. "Where's Ronan?" she said. "Downstairs, managing the situation." "Managing it how?" "Don't worry about Ronan." That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. He came away from the window and moved toward the kitchen, opening a panel she hadn't noticed before. It looked like a cabinet door, but it wasn't. It opened inward to a recessed space built into the wall, and reached inside. He came out with 2 things, a phone that wasn't the one he'd been using, and a flat, matte black object that he checked briefly and then tucked into the back of his waistband in a motion so practiced it was barely a motion at all. Serena watched this. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed, which was the first time she'd heard him use the word, and somehow it was more alarming than everything else combined. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, read something, typed something back. His jaw was set in a specific way that she was beginning to learn meant he was doing internal math on a problem and the numbers weren't coming out clean. "Change of plan," he said. "We're not going down the main elevator." "There's another one?" "Service elevator, freight access on the east side of the building. It goes to the parking sublevel, different entrance than the main garage." He was moving as he talked, checking the hallway, doing the systematic sweep of the space that she was starting to recognize as habit. "Ronan's going to meet us 2 floors down." "Why 2 floors down and not the sublevel?" He looked at her. It was a quick look, but it had something in it, a slight recalibration of how he was reading her. "Because if someone's already inside the building, they'll be watching the sublevel access. 2 floors gives us a junction point that isn't on a standard security schematic." She filed that away. "You've planned an exit from this building before." "I plan exits from every building. That's a very specific way to live." "It's kept me alive," he said flatly, and moved toward the service corridor door. She followed him. The service corridor was a different world from the penthouse. Bare concrete walls, industrial lighting that buzzed and threw everything in a slightly yellow-gray tone, the smell of cleaning products and something metallic underneath. Their footsteps were too loud on the floor, and Damien immediately moved to the left side where a rubber runner covered the concrete, and she mirrored him without being told. He was moving fast but controlled, and she was keeping up, which surprised her a little because of the ribs. Pain was doing something strange under adrenaline. She could feel it. It was absolutely still there, but it was behind glass somehow, observable rather than overwhelming. She knew from experience that this was a temporary condition, that the glass would crack the moment the adrenaline cleared, but for now she used it. The stairwell was at the end of the corridor. Damien stopped at the door, put his hand flat against it for a second, listening, then pushed through. They went down 2 flights and stopped at a landing with a metal door marked with a floor number and an emergency exit symbol. Damien pushed it open slowly, checked the corridor beyond. Then he held it and she went through and he came in behind her. Ronan was there. He was leaning against the wall 10 feet down the corridor with his arms crossed, wearing an expression that said he had been in worse situations than this, but didn't feel the need to rank them. He straightened when he saw them, looked at Serena for a brief second, looked at Damien. "Two confirmed in the lobby," he said, "one in a car on the north side. I make it 6 total, but I've only got eyes on 3. The elevator bank, both being watched, main and service." Ronan's eyes moved to Serena again, just briefly, with the particular quality of someone reassessing a variable they hadn't initially weighted heavily. "She slow us down?" "No," Serena said before Damien could answer. Ronan looked at her with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't warm either, the expression of a man who dealt in demonstrated facts rather than stated intentions. "Good," he said, and moved toward the east end of the corridor. They went through a utility area, water heaters, electrical panels, junction boxes, and out through a door that required Ronan's keycard and opened into a concrete ramp that sloped down into the parking sublevel from an angle that came in behind where the main access would be watched. The car was there, different from the one they'd arrived in, older, less distinctive, the kind of vehicle that existed in the middle of every traffic camera's blind statistical zone. Ronan got behind the wheel, and Damien got in the passenger seat, and Serena got into the back, and they were moving before the door had fully closed. No one spoke for the first 3 minutes. Ronan drove them out through an exit that came up on a side street rather than the main avenue, and then they were in traffic, and Serena watched the tower they'd just evacuated recede in the rear window and tried to organize her thoughts into something workable. She was not succeeding entirely. "Where are we going this time?" she said. "Safe house," Damien said. "East side." "East side." Daniel was on the east side. "How long?" she said. 40 minutes. She looked at the back of Damien's head. He was on the phone again, the new one, speaking quietly and quickly in a cadence that suggested he was issuing instructions to multiple parties simultaneously, managing something larger than just the two of them in a car. She leaned forward. "I need to tell my brother I'm alive." "Not yet." "It's been hours. If he doesn't know you're missing, he doesn't look for you," Damien said, not turning around. "If he doesn't look for you, he doesn't lead anyone to you. It's cleaner." "Cleaner," she repeated. The word felt wrong in her mouth, too technical for what she was describing. "He's my brother, and right now that makes him a liability. For both of you." He said it without particular cruelty, which somehow made it worse. Just a fact being laid out, a variable being identified and categorized. 24 hours. I meant it. You said 24 hours back at the penthouse. The timeline's already moved. He turned then, slightly, just enough to look at her over his shoulder. "Yes," he said. "It has." The acknowledgement surprised her. She'd expected a deflection, a redirection, another flat declaration. Not yes. Not the straightforward admission that the situation had already exceeded what he'd projected. "So the 24 hours is fluid," she said. "All timelines are fluid. That's not a plan. That's an improvisation." "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive," he said, and turned back to the front. Ronan made a sound that might have been the very beginning of a laugh, quickly compressed. Serena looked at him in the rearview mirror. He had the carefully neutral expression of a man who was not going to weigh in on whatever was happening between the other two occupants of the vehicle. The safe house was in a neighborhood that existed in the functional, anonymous middle of the city. Residential streets with small houses and old trees, and the particular density of a place that had never been gentrified because there was nothing about it that attracted gentrification. It was the kind of street where cars were parked on lawns and people kept their lights on late, and no one paid attention to their neighbors' schedules because everyone was too busy with their own. The house itself was a 2-story with peeling paint on the porch railing and a detached garage that Ronan pulled into before they got out. The inside was clean but spare, the same impersonal quality as the penthouse but without the luxury, just furniture that functioned without declaring anything about the person who'd chosen it. Serena sat down at the kitchen table because her body had apparently decided that the adrenaline lease was expiring. The ribs came back all at once. She didn't make a sound. She put both hands flat on the table and breathed through it in the way she'd gotten good at, the careful, shallow rhythm that kept the broken things from grinding against each other, and waited for it to recede to something manageable. Damien came in from the hallway and saw her. He stood for a moment reading it. There's ibuprofen in the cabinet above the sink, he said. I know what ibuprofen is. I'm telling you where it is. I heard you. She didn't move toward the cabinet because moving quickly was currently off the table. She breathed. Tell me about the Ortega Syndicate. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Not because she'd asked him to, she sensed, but because he'd evaluated the situation and decided a conversation was the relevant next action. How much do you want? He said. Enough to understand what I'm in the middle of. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding on the version of a story that was most useful rather than most complete. She recognized it from the other direction. She'd done it herself, telling people about Marcus, choosing the version that would end the conversation rather than the one that would open it. The Ortega organization controls most of the financial network in this city's black market, he said. Not product movement. They're not primarily a trafficking operation. Money. They process it, route it, clean it. It's less visible than the other side of the business, which means it's lasted longer and built deeper. He had his hands on the table, lax, the posture of someone who was comfortable with the information they were sharing. 3 months ago, they started moving into territory that overlaps with mine. Not directly. They were being careful about that, but close enough that it created problems. Your territory, she said. My operations. A slight pause. I don't run product either. I run security infrastructure, private intelligence, a certain amount of enforcement work for people who need problems handled without official channels. That's a very professional way of describing organized crime. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. It is. She appreciated the directness, even now, maybe especially now. And the missing money. The money Marco was supposed to move. $2.3 million, cash, in a transfer that was supposed to go through a series of shell accounts and come out clean on the other side. He tapped one finger on the table once, lightly. It didn't arrive. Marco claimed he delivered it. The receiving end said they never got it. And you think he kept it? I think he gave it to someone. Whether he kept any of it is secondary. What matters to the Ortega people is that someone in their chain failed, and the money's gone, and they want both the money and the person responsible. Right now, those things are not separable in their minds. He looked at her. You're connected to him. That's enough. I was living with a man I didn't know, she said. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he did. I thought he worked in logistics. I know. Logistics, she said, with a specific quality of bitterness that came from somewhere deeper than tonight. He told me he worked in logistics. I believed him. For 8 months I believed him and thought the reason he was the way he was had something to do with stress about work or his childhood or... She stopped, put her hands flat on the table. I believed him. Damien said nothing. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance or with the kind of careful sympathy that people deployed when they didn't know what else to do. He just let the silence be what it was. She was surprised to find that was the right call. I need to know, she said. Am I going to be able to go back to my life? Define your life. She looked at him. My job, my apartment, my brother, the things I had before last night. The apartment, no, not for a while. He said it simply. Your job, possibly, depending on how this resolves. Your brother, yes, once the situation is stabilized. You'll be able to contact him. He'll know you're all right. How long is a while? Weeks, potentially, not months. I can't just disappear for weeks. I understand that, he said, and there was the first thing she'd heard from him that sounded like something adjacent to an apology. Not the apology itself, not the full shape of it, but the implication that he was aware the situation cost her something specific, and that cost was not invisible to him. I'm not telling you this is without consequence. I'm telling you the alternative. The alternative. She knew what the alternative was. He'd laid it out clearly in the penthouse before she'd decided to stay. The front door opened and Ronan came in, and the quality of his expression as he crossed the room to Damien told her immediately that whatever he was carrying was not good news. He bent down and said something low near Damien's ear, something she caught only pieces of. Confirmation, and Reyes and one other word that landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Dead. Damien's face didn't change. He stood up, moved with Ronan toward the far side of the kitchen, and there was a brief, low exchange that Serena wasn't meant to hear and mostly didn't. She heard enough. Marco was dead. Not Marcus Cole, the man she'd been living with, the name she'd attached to the person and the relationship and the 8 months of her life she couldn't get back. Marco Reyes, the Ortega courier with the missing money and the real name she'd never been given, was dead. And from the specific clipped quality of Ronan's voice and the direction of Damien's eyes when he turned briefly in her direction, the how of it was not simple and was not clean. She stood up from the table. Both men looked at her. "He's dead," she said. Damien looked at her for one beat. Then, "Yes." "When?" "Earlier tonight, after we left the apartment." "Your people." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to answer the question without answering it. "The situation became complicated during transport," he said. Serena stood very still. The boots were still half a size too big, and she could feel the extra space at the toes. Her ribs were grinding in a slow, persistent rhythm. She looked at Damien across the small kitchen, and she tried to figure out what she felt, which turned out to be a harder problem than she expected, because what she felt was layered in a way that didn't untangle quickly. Marcus was dead. The man who had split her lip and broken her ribs and done other things that had come before both those things, things she hadn't inventoried tonight because some things you didn't take out and look at directly, was dead. That sat in her chest alongside the ribs and pressed against them from the inside, and she couldn't tell if the pressure was grief or relief or something else entirely that didn't have a clean name. "The cartel knows," she said. It wasn't a question. "They'll know by morning," Ronan said from behind Damien, "if they don't already. And now they definitely think I know where the money is." "Now they definitely know Damien's people were involved in what happened to their courier," Ronan said, with the specific flatness of someone presenting a corrected version of the problem. "Which means this isn't just about you anymore." She looked at Damien. He was looking back at her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that was not the controlled blankness she'd been reading all night, something that had a crack in it, the hairline fracture of a man who'd made a calculation that had returned an unexpected variable. "You didn't plan for him to die," she said. "No," he said. "What did you plan?" "Interrogation, information. A clean exchange that would have taken the Ortega organization's attention off you and put it on the money instead." He said it without flinching from it. "That's not the situation we have." "What situation do we have?" Ronan answered before Damien could. "We have a dead cartel asset, a missing $2.3 million that nobody's found yet, a woman connected to both, and an organization that's going to want to close all 3 of those open items simultaneously." He looked at Serena with the same neutral, assessing quality he'd been using since the parking garage. In that kind of calculus, closing an open item doesn't mean finding answers. It means eliminating the question. The room was very quiet. Serena breathed through her ribs. She looked at Damien. "So I can't leave," she said. He held her gaze. "Not safely." "No." "You said earlier." "I said you weren't my prisoner." His voice was even. "You're not. The door isn't locked. But the situation has changed since I said that, and you know it has." She did know. She'd known the moment she heard the word dead and understood what it connected to and what it meant for the geometry of everything around it. She turned and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the street was dark and ordinary. A car parked on the opposite side, a light on in a second-floor window of the house across the way, a cat sitting on a porch railing. The architecture of a normal night in a normal neighborhood, indifferent to what was happening inside this house. She pressed her forehead against the glass for a moment. It was cold. She focused on that. Just the cold of it, specific and present. "If they come here," she said. "They won't. Not tonight. This location is clean. But eventually." "Everything surfaces eventually," Damien said. "That's why we have to move first." She turned. "Move how?" He was already looking at Ronan. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of 2 people who had been working together long enough to operate at higher bandwidth than language allowed. Ronan gave a slight nod and moved toward the back of the house. Damien looked at her. "There's a man named Cortez," he said. "Vicente Cortez. He's the operational head of the Ortega syndicate in this city, the financial side, the side Marco was working for. He's the one who gave the order to start looking for you." He said it with the same flat certainty he'd been using all night, but underneath it now there was something different, a current, a direction, the unmistakable quality of a decision that had already been made. Everything that happens next runs through him. "So you're going to go after him," she said. He didn't deny it. "I'm going to dismantle the infrastructure he operates in, Cortez himself." A pause. "Cortez will be handled." Handled. The same word he'd used about Marcus. She was learning the vocabulary. Handled meant something specific and permanent in Damien Voss's language, a clean euphemism for a clean kind of ending. She should have been more frightened by that. She examined herself honestly and found that she wasn't, or not in the way she expected. She was frightened of the cartel, of the word eliminating in Ronan's flat sentence, of the fact that she was standing in a safe house in a neighborhood she didn't know, wearing boots that didn't fit, while people with resources she couldn't fully picture had decided she was a loose end worth tying. That fear was real and appropriate, and she was holding it carefully. But the thing Damien was describing, the deliberate, strategic, cold-blooded dismantling of the system that was currently trying to erase her, that didn't frighten her the way she thought it should. That was information about herself that she filed away for later examination. "What do you need from me?" she said. He blinked. Just once, the smallest possible register of surprise. "Nothing right now. I was in that apartment for 8 months. I know his routines, the people he met with, the calls he made when he thought I was asleep." She looked at Damien steadily. "I didn't know what it meant, but I remember it. I remember everything." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that precise, recalibrating attention. "All right," he said. "I'm not just a liability," she said. "I know things." "All right," he said again, and this time it sounded less like a placeholder and more like an actual answer. Ronan came back from the rear of the house at a pace that was 2 steps faster than his normal one, which was the first time Serena had seen him move at anything other than a measured rate, and that alone was enough to tighten everything in her chest. He looked at Damien. "We've got a problem." "Define it." "The East Side location, the secondary address, the one I used for the transport vehicle." Ronan's jaw was set hard. "Someone's been watching it, not Ortega." Damien went very still. "Then who?" "I don't know yet." Ronan's eyes moved to Serena briefly, then back. "But whoever it is, they know the vehicle, which means they know we're in this grid." He paused, and the pause had weight in it, the specific weight of information being delivered carefully because the person delivering it understood what it meant. "And Damien, they're not moving like Ortega people. They're moving like they've done this before," Ronan said, "like they know exactly which doors to watch." The sentence landed in the kitchen and nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. Damien's face had gone somewhere else entirely. Not blank, but concentrated in a way that was almost physical, like watching someone compress a large amount of force into a very small space. He turned toward the window, then back. His hand came up and pressed flat against the counter edge, and Serena watched his knuckles go briefly white before he released the pressure. "Inside information," he said. Ronan didn't answer, which was an answer. "Who knew about the East Side location?" Damien said. "You, me, Hatch." A pause with mass to it. "And whoever Hatch talked to." The name meant nothing to Serena, but the way Damien received it, the specific stillness that overtook him, the quality of a man absorbing a blow he had not seen coming but was refusing to show on his face, told her it meant a great deal to him. "Where is he now?" Damien said. "That's the problem," Ronan said. "He's not answering." The silence that followed that was a different kind of silence than anything else in the night so far. Everything before had been the silence of urgency, of movement paused before the next movement. This was the silence of something breaking, a load-bearing thing, the kind whose absence changes the architecture of everything around it. Damien pushed off the counter. "We need to move. Right now." They went out the back. Ronan led them through a small yard, dead grass, a chain-link fence with a gate that he lifted rather than unlatched because the latch was rusted shut, and into the alley that ran behind the row of houses. A second car was parked 50 feet down the alley. Not their car, a different one, an older sedan the color of concrete. Ronan had the keys already out. Serena got in the back again. Her ribs were conducting a sustained objection to every movement she made, and she was running low on the resources required to argue back. She pressed her arm against her left side and held it there, and looked out the window at the alley moving past, and tried to organize her thinking. Hatch. Someone named Hatch who had known about the East Side location. Someone who wasn't answering his phone. Someone whose silence, in the current context, pointed in one direction so clearly that Damien had received the news like a punch he'd been trained to absorb rather than a surprise. She leaned forward. "Who is Hatch?" Damien was looking at his phone. He didn't look up. "Someone who works for me." "Worked," Ronan said from the front, and the past tense had a specific weight. "We don't know that yet," Damien said. "We know enough. We know the location was burned. We don't know how or by who specifically, or whether—" "Damien." Ronan's voice was flat and careful, in the way of someone choosing not to have an argument they'd already had internally and resolved. "We know." Damien looked up from the phone. He looked at the back of Ronan's head for a long moment, and Serena watched his face in the partial dark of the moving car, the shadows moving across it, the city light breaking through in fragments. And she saw the moment he arrived at what Ronan had already arrived at. She saw it the way you see weather changing, not dramatic, not sudden, just a shift in the quality of the light that means everything following is going to be different from everything preceding. He went back to his phone. "I need to make a call," he said. "Alone." Ronan glanced in the mirror. "We're 40 minutes from the warehouse. Pull over somewhere quiet. Give me 10 minutes. Ronan found a side street 3 blocks later, parking under a broken streetlight, and got out of the car without being asked. He stood near the front bumper with his back to the windows, which left Serena and Damien in the car together with the engine idling. She could feel him deciding whether to ask her to get out too. She watched the decision work itself through his expression and then not arrive at the obvious conclusion, which told her something. He dialed, held the phone to his ear. 4 rings, 5. Then a pickup. She could hear the connection change quality. And then a voice, male, unfamiliar, saying something she couldn't make out. "Tell me where you are," Damien said. His voice had changed. Not louder, not harder exactly, but stripped of the last thin layer of management that had been over everything else all night. What was underneath wasn't rage. It was something colder and more patient than rage. The voice of a man who intended to have the conversation he was having and was going to have it at whatever length was required. "Don't do that. Don't give me that. I need you to tell me where you are right now." A pause. Hatch. The name, flat and deliberate. "I have people watching an East Side location that 3 people knew about. You are one of those 3 people. The other 2 are in this car with me. So I need you to explain to me, in whatever detail feels relevant to you, how a location that 3 people knew about has surveillance on it that does not belong to the Ortega organization." Another pause. Longer. Serena watched Damien's hand tighten on the phone until the case creaked. "Say that again," he said. She couldn't hear what was being said on the other end. She could only read the effect of it on Damien's face, and what she read was bad, not the surface bad of a setback or a complication, but the deeper bad of information that was restructuring the ground under everything else. "How long?" he said. Then, "How long, Hatch?" Then the silence of someone listening, the specific held stillness of a man receiving news he cannot interrupt, even though every instinct is telling him to interrupt it. "No, stop talking and listen to me." His voice dropped slightly. "You are going to stay exactly where you are. You are not going to make any other calls. You are not going to move, and you are going to wait for me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Say yes." A beat. "Say yes." Whatever was said made Damien close his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he ended the call and sat in the back seat of a concrete-colored sedan on a broken-lit side street and didn't speak. Serena waited. She was getting better at knowing when to wait. "The people watching the East Side location," he said finally, "they're not Ortega." Ronan said that. "They're not cartel at all." He was looking straight ahead through the windshield at the back of Ronan's jacket. "They're federal." The word sat between them. "Federal," she said. As in, law enforcement. He said it cleanly, without visible emotion, which was its own kind of emotion. "A task force that has been building a case for approximately 14 months. Against me, primarily, with the Ortega organization as a secondary target." A pause. Hatch has been their source inside my operation for the last 6 of those months. Serena sat with that for a moment. Then, he was feeding them information, locations, movement patterns, personnel details. The muscle in his jaw moved. He gave them the East Side address. They were there to observe the vehicle connected to Marco Reyes, which connects to the transport, which connects to the death. He stopped. Which connects to me. So you have a cartel trying to kill me, she said slowly, and a federal investigation trying to build a case that now includes a murder. A death during a criminal operation, he said, which amounts to the same thing in terms of exposure, yes. And the man who told the federal side where to look is sitting in an apartment 4 miles from here waiting for me to arrive. His voice was very even. Because I asked him to stay, and he said yes, and he's either genuinely afraid of what I'm going to do, or he's giving them my current location as we speak, and I won't know which until I'm standing in front of him. She stared at him. Then why did you tell him to stay? Why not just— Because I need to know what he gave them, Damien said. Not just the locations, everything. What they know about my operation, what they know about the Reyes situation, what they know about— He stopped, looked at her. And there it was again, that hairline crack in the controlled surface. The thing underneath that was not abstract at all. What they know about you. She understood then. It wasn't just about the strategic intelligence. He needed to know whether the federal side was looking at her as a witness, as a co-conspirator, or as a victim. Because those 3 categories had radically different implications for what happened next. Ronan tapped on the window. Damien lowered it. We need to decide, Ronan said. Warehouse or Hatch? Hatch first. Ronan looked at him for a moment. That's the move you want to make. It's the move we have to make. If he's already burned the location to the task force, then we'll know that when we get there, Damien said. Get in. Ronan got in. He pulled back onto the street without further discussion, though Serena could see in the set of his shoulders that he had an opinion he was choosing not to deposit. She leaned back against the seat and looked at the ceiling of the car. Cracked vinyl, a water stain in one corner, a small tear near the center where the foam showed through. She focused on these details because they were specific and concrete and present, and the rest of what was currently true of her situation was none of those things. Federal task force, 14 months, 6 months of Hatch feeding them information from inside. She thought about what that meant structurally. An operation running for 14 months didn't get shut down over a single incident, even a fatal one. It was building towards something larger, a comprehensive case, an indictment, a moment when everything collected over 14 months got laid out in front of a grand jury, and the people who'd been building it got to show their work. The death of Marco Reyes was a complication to that timeline, not an ending of it. It created urgency. It created pressure. It turned a deliberate, methodical investigation into something that might move faster than anyone had planned. And she was standing in the middle of all of it because her hands had been shaking when she tried to send a text. The apartment building where Hatch lived was on a street that felt different from the safe house neighborhood. Slightly more transient, higher density, the kind of place people passed through rather than settled into. Ronan parked on the street rather than the lot, which Serena had started to understand meant he wanted multiple exit options. Damien looked at her and thus, "Stay in the car." "No," she said, "this is not a discussion. You have a cartel and a federal task force both moving in this city tonight, and you want me to sit alone in a car on a street you've never parked on before." She met his eyes. "Try again." He looked at her for 2 full seconds. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless I ask you something directly." "Fine." They went in through the building's side entrance. Ronan had a key, which meant this was a location Damien had used before, which meant Hatch had reported it, which meant the question of how compromised they were kept expanding outward every time she thought she had the perimeter of it. 3rd floor, end of the corridor, a door that looked identical to every other door. Ronan knocked. 3 times, a specific rhythm. A pause. 2 more. Movement from inside. Then the door opened. The man who opened it was in his 40s, compact and gray-haired, with the look of someone who'd been running on anxiety for long enough that anxiety had become his resting expression. He was wearing jeans and a dark shirt, and when he saw Damien, his face did something complicated. relief and dread arriving simultaneously, fighting for the same real estate. "Damien," he said. "Hatch," Damien said, and walked in. The apartment was small and messy in a way that felt permanent rather than situational. Papers, takeout containers, a laptop open on the coffee table with multiple browser windows visible. Hatch stood back from the door as Ronan came in behind Serena, and Serena watched him take in her presence and noticeably recalibrate. "Who is she?" Hatch said. "Why?" Damien said. The single word, with the specific quality he put behind it, made Hatch's posture change in a way that was physically visible. His shoulders came in slightly, the body's instinctive self-reduction in the presence of a threat it couldn't counter. "I need to understand what you told them," Damien said. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the small living room and looked at Hatch with the same still, dark attention he'd been turning on everything all night. "Everything, not the version you think I can handle. Everything." Hatch pressed his mouth together. He looked at the floor, then at Ronan, then at the floor again. "Hatch. The locations," Hatch said. "Movement patterns. The Reyes situation. I told them about the surveillance you had on him, the plan to pick him up." He swallowed. "I didn't know he was going to die. I want you to understand that. I didn't know how that was going to go." "What about the penthouse?" Damien said. A pause. "Hatch." "Yes." "The safe house on Renly Street?" "Yes." "This address?" Hatch stopped. "They already had this address." "I didn't give them this one. They got it from something else. I don't know how." Damien was very still. "What about her?" He didn't gesture toward Serena, didn't look at her, just let the pronoun do its work. Hatch's eyes moved to Serena. The complicated look on his face got more complicated. "They know she was in the apartment when Reyes was taken. They know she left with you." He stopped again. "They're calling her a material witness. To what specifically?" "To the Reyes death, and—" Hatch stopped, ran a hand over the back of his neck, the gesture of a man who had something left to say and was calculating the cost of saying it. "And to your operation generally. They think she knows things about how you run. They're going to want to talk to her." "They're going to want to use her," Damien said. "That's what a material witness is," Hatch said, with a flash of something that might have been defiance from someone with less to be afraid of. Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned slightly and looked at Serena, and she felt the full weight of what had just been said land on both of them simultaneously. Material witness, which meant the federal task force believed she had information about Damien's operation, which meant if they found her, the leverage they could apply to extract that information and the leverage they could apply to her situation to make cooperation look like the rational choice was substantial. She knew nothing about Damien's operation. She'd known him for approximately 8 hours. That wouldn't matter to people with a 14-month case who needed a breakthrough. "Why?" Damien said. Back to Hatch. 6 months. "I need to understand why." Hatch laughed, a short, rough sound with nothing happy in it. "Because I have a daughter," he said. "Because they came to me with something they had on my daughter and told me the only way it went away quietly was if I cooperated, because—" He stopped, pressed his fist against his mouth for a second. "Because I'm not like you, Damien. I don't have the part that lets me just absorb it and keep moving. I made a choice to protect my daughter, and every other choice after that was just trying to survive the first one." The room was very quiet. Ronan was near the door, expression unreadable. Serena was near the window, pressed slightly back from it the way Damien had been at the penthouse, staying to the side of the glass. Damien looked at Hatch for a long time. She watched him look, watched whatever internal process was working behind those still, dark eyes, and she couldn't read it the way she'd been unable to read him before, except that it was more complicated than she'd expected, the way he was receiving what Hatch had just said. Not cold, not clean, something more difficult than that. "Are they coming here tonight?" he said. "I don't know," Hatch said. "I haven't made contact since earlier. I don't know what they know right now." Best estimate. Hatch thought about it. If they tracked the vehicle to the East Side address, and it was gone by the time they got there, maybe. They might try to roll this location to move faster. Or they might wait and watch. He paused. "It depends on how the Reyes' death changes their timeline." "It accelerates it," Damien said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Hatch said. It accelerates it. Damien nodded once. He looked at Ronan. Something passed between them, that high bandwidth exchange, and Ronan straightened slightly, and Damien looked back at Hatch. You're coming with us, he said. Damien, not a discussion. You're a liability here, and you know information I need, and you are coming with us. He said it without anger, which was more authoritative than anger would have been. I'm not going to hurt you, Hatch. That's not what this is. But I need you where I can see you until I understand the full shape of what we're dealing with. Hatch looked at him for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop on the coffee table and reached for his jacket off the back of the couch. They were almost to the door when Serena said, "Wait." Everyone looked at her. She was looking at the laptop, at the browser windows visible through the half-closed lid. One of them. She'd registered it peripherally when she first came in and hadn't focused on it, and now it was suddenly the only thing in the room she could see. She crossed to the coffee table and opened the laptop. "What are you doing?" Ronan said. She didn't answer. She was looking at the screen. A browser window with what appeared to be a secure message interface. Not email, something more encrypted, and visible in the open window, a message thread. She couldn't read all of it at the distance and the angle, but she read enough. She read a name she recognized. Not Damien's name, not Ronan's, not Hatch's. Her brother's name. Daniel Vale. East Side address. Contact established. She stood very still. The ribs ground. Her hands, both of them, had gone very cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Hatch," she said. Her voice came out remarkably level, which surprised her. "Why is my brother's name in this thread?" The silence in the room changed quality immediately. She heard it without looking away from the screen. Ronan's weight shifting, Damien going completely still behind her, Hatch making a sound that was barely a sound, more a breath that had started toward being a word and then stopped. She turned and looked at Hatch. His face told her everything before he said a single word. The relief and dread combination she'd read when he first opened the door, she understood it now. The relief hadn't been about Damien arriving. The relief had been about something else, something that came before Damien, a variable that was already in play before any of them had knocked on his door tonight. "They found him through the carrier records," Hatch said. "The text message you sent. The wrong number. They traced the originating number and the intended recipient. Your brother was the intended recipient, which made him—" "They went to him," she said. "This afternoon," Hatch said, "before any of this. Before the penthouse, before—" He stopped. "They told him you were in danger. They told him the man you were living with was connected to a criminal operation and that you had been taken by—" Another stop. He looked at Damien briefly. "They told him you had been taken." The cold in her hands had moved into her chest. "He thinks I was kidnapped," she said. "They needed him to cooperate," Hatch said, and now there was something in his voice that sounded like genuine shame, which was almost worse than if there'd been nothing. "They needed a secondary contact point who could be used to reach you, someone you'd trust, someone who'd be able to get you to turn myself in," she said, "to come in voluntarily, as a witness, not to turn myself in," she repeated, and this time the level quality of her voice had a different quality underneath it, something that had been level for too long and was approaching the structural limit of what level could hold. She looked at Damien. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Not the controlled blankness, not the recalibrating assessment, not even the hairline crack version of something more human. This was different. This was the expression of a man who understood, completely and without flinching, what the information she'd just read meant for both of them. They had her brother. Not physically, not yet. But they had reached him, told him a version of events that would make him want to find her, that would make him a willing participant in getting the task force access to her. They'd turned her one trusted contact, the one person she would have called before anyone, the one number she'd been trying to reach all night, into a door that opened in the wrong direction. Every path she'd been holding on to, every version of when this is over, I can go back, ran through Daniel. And Daniel was now on the other side of a door she couldn't safely walk through. Ronan said very quietly, "We need to leave. Now." She didn't move. "Serena," Damien's voice. First time he'd used her name, it landed differently than she expected. "We have to go." She looked at the laptop screen one more time. Her brother's name, his address, the neat transactional language of people who had turned him into a resource without his full understanding of what they were doing. She closed the laptop. She walked to the door. And somewhere between the coffee table and the door, something that had been one kind of thing inside her became a different kind of thing entirely. Not harder exactly, but changed in the way that things change when the last version of a plan has been eliminated, and what remains isn't hope or fear, but something that doesn't have a name yet, but functions like resolve. She got in the car and didn't look back at the building. Ronan drove. Hatch was in the front passenger seat, which put him where Ronan could see him without turning around, which Serena understood was not accidental. Damien was beside her in the back, and the city was moving past the windows, and nobody said anything for 4 full minutes. Then Damien said, "Tell me about your brother." She looked at him. Why? Because they chose him specifically. That means they assessed him and decided he was usable. I need to understand what they based that on. She looked at the window. He's 31. He's an accountant. He has a girlfriend named Paula who teaches elementary school, and they have a cat named something stupid that I can never remember. She paused. He's been trying to get me away from Marcus for over a year. He left the offer open every time I said no. Another pause. He's exactly the kind of person who would believe a federal agent telling him his sister was in danger. He wouldn't ask enough questions. He'd just want to help. So he's already cooperating. He thinks he's rescuing me. Damien absorbed that. They'll use him to make contact, a call, a message, something that comes from him directly so you recognize the number and pick up. And when I pick up, they're on the line. Or they use the call to triangulate your location. Both, probably both. He looked at her. Don't contact him, not until this is resolved. I know, she said. The words came out flat, and she let them be flat because the alternative was worse. The warehouse was in the industrial district south of the river, a legitimate freight business on paper, the kind that generated enough traffic that additional vehicles coming and going didn't register as unusual. Ronan drove them through a side gate and into the interior loading dock, and they got out into a space that smelled like diesel and cold concrete and the specific industrial neutrality of a place that had been used for a long time for things it wasn't built for. There were 3 other people inside. Serena registered them quickly. 2 men she hadn't seen before, positioned near the far wall with the particular posture of people who were armed and waiting, and a woman in her 40s sitting at a folding table covered in laptops and equipment, who looked up when they came in with the expression of someone who had been expecting them and had things to say. Lena, Damien said. About time, Lena said. She had short, gray-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the brisk, slightly impatient energy of someone whose primary relationship was with information and who found people consistently slower than data. She looked at Serena. This is her. Yes, Damien said. Sit down, Lena said to Serena specifically, with the particular authority of someone who didn't issue requests. Serena sat down, mostly because the Ribs were voting strongly in favor of any option that involved sitting. Lena looked at Damien. The task force moved up their timeline. I'm seeing coordination between 3 field teams in the last 2 hours. They're not in observation mode anymore. They're in acquisition mode. They want bodies. She tapped something on the nearest laptop. Specifically yours and now hers, and they want Hatch as a controlled asset back in position. Hatch, who had been standing near the wall since they'd come in, made a sound. Lena looked at him briefly. You gave them a lot, she said, without particular judgment, just the factual weight of it. I know what I gave them, Hatch said. Then you know they'll burn you the moment they have what they need from Damien, she said. That's how this works. You understand that? Hatch didn't answer. His jaw was set, and he was looking at a point on the floor, and Serena had the specific, uncomfortable sensation of watching a person understand something they'd understood intellectually for a long time, but had been able to keep at a distance and could no longer. Damien moved to the table. He stood over the laptops and looked at what Lena had pulled up. Maps, communication intercepts, something that looked like a personnel chart, and Serena watched him process it with that same compressed, high-speed quality she'd been observing all night, the speed of someone who had been making decisions under pressure for so long that the mechanism had been refined past what most people could operate at. Cortez, he said. Still in the city, Lena said. He moved locations twice in the last 6 hours. He's not running. He's consolidating, calling in people. She paused. He thinks the Reyes death was deliberate provocation. He's responding to it as a declaration. It wasn't deliberate. I know that. He doesn't. Lena looked at him over the top of her glasses. He's also aware that the task force is active. My read is he's going to try to move on you before they can take the problem off the board himself and then deal with the federal situation as a separate matter. Timeline. Hours, not days. The word landed in the warehouse and Serena felt it physically. A change in pressure, the way the air moves differently before something large happens. Ronan had been quiet since they'd come in. He spoke now from where he was standing near the loading dock door. So we have the cartel moving to hit us, a federal task force moving to grab us, and our internal security compromised. He said it with the particular flatness of a man who was not catastrophizing, just completing an inventory. What does the move look like? Damien looked at the map on the screen. He looked at it for a long time. We don't wait, he said. Ronan looked at him. Say that clearly. We go at Cortez. Tonight. We don't sit here and let both sides close in. We go at the one we can actually neutralize, and we do it before his consolidation is complete. He straightened up. If Cortez is gone, the Ortega operation loses its operational head. Without him directing it, they fragment. A fragmented organization doesn't mount coordinated strikes. He looked at Ronan. The task force is a problem for after, one problem at a time. Going at Cortez tonight means going at a location he's fortified in the last 6 hours, Ronan said, with whatever headcount he's brought in. Yes, with our people. Yes. Which are, Ronan gestured at the two men near the wall, at Lena, at the space around them. Not many. Enough, Damien said. He said it the way he said most things, without apparent doubt, which Serena was learning didn't mean the doubt wasn't there. It meant he'd already made the decision about whether to let the doubt have a vote and had decided against it. We go in fast, targeted, surgical. Not a war, a removal. Cortez specifically, cut the head. Serena had been listening to all of this with the slightly external quality of someone processing information that was simultaneously extremely important to them and very far outside their frame of reference. She understood the logic. She understood the structure of what he was proposing. What she didn't understand yet was where she fit in the frame of what came next. What about me? She said. Damien looked at her. You stay here with Lena. That's not what I meant. She held his gaze. I told you earlier. I know things. Marco's routines, the people who came to the apartment. There was one man who came 3 times in the last month, always after midnight, always stayed less than 30 minutes. I never heard his name, but I can describe him and I remember the dates. Lena looked up from the laptop. She looked at Serena with a sharply recalibrated attention. Describe him. Mid-50s. Heavy set, but not soft. The weight was in his chest and shoulders. He had a scar on his left hand between the thumb and forefinger, like a burn. He drove a dark blue SUV, late model, and he always parked half a block down rather than in front. Serena paused. He made Marco nervous. Not the regular nervous. Different. The kind where you pretend you're not nervous and you're not doing a good job of it. Lena was already typing. She pulled up something, scrolled, stopped, turned the laptop toward Damien. Vargas, Damien said. He said the name with a specific quality. Recognition, but not the uncomplicated kind. Rafael Vargas. He's Cortez's financial liaison. If he was visiting Reyes personally, in person, after midnight... The missing money, Lena said. He wasn't just coordinating, he was managing it directly. Which means Cortez knows exactly what happened to it. And this whole search for the missing courier performance has been... Cover, Damien said, for something else. The warehouse went quiet. Serena looked at the faces around her. Damien's face, Lena's face, Ronan turning from the door to look at Damien with an expression that said he was revising something significant. They weren't looking for the money because it's missing, Ronan said slowly. They were looking for anyone who might know where it went, because someone inside their own operation moved it. Vargas, Damien said, and now he needs to make sure anyone who could connect him to Reyes doesn't connect him to Reyes, Damien said. He looked at Serena. The look was brief and complete and contained something she could only describe as the specific gravity of a person understanding, in real time, that a variable they'd been calculating wrong has just corrected itself in a way that changes the entire result. They weren't coming after you because they thought you knew where the money was. They were coming after me because Vargas needed to know what I'd seen, she said. Whether I could identify him. Whether you could place him at the apartment, in proximity to Reyes, in the weeks before the money went missing. He said it flat and clean, and she heard it the same way. She had seen him 3 times. She could identify him. She could place him, date and time, at a location directly connected to the missing funds. She was the one person whose testimony to anyone, federal task force, rival organization, anyone with interest in the truth of what had happened, could put Rafael Vargas in the room. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. So it's not just Cortez you need to remove. It's Vargas. Yes, Damien said, and Vargas is with Cortez right now. Almost certainly. She stood up. The ribs objected, loudly, and she absorbed it and stayed standing. Then what are we waiting for? Ronan made the sound again that was the beginning of a laugh pressed down to almost nothing. Lena looked at her with an expression that was the closest thing to approval Serena had seen on her face. Damien looked at her for a long moment. You're not coming, he said. You have 4 people, including yourself, and a task force tightening around this location, she said. I'm the only one here who can positively identify Vargas on sight. In the dark, at distance, under pressure. None of you have ever seen him in person. I have photographs. Photographs of a man who was careful enough to park half a block away and visit after midnight for months without getting flagged until tonight. She held Damien's gaze. How confident are you in those photographs? A silence. She comes, Lena said from the table, without looking up. Identification asset. She stays back and she IDs. That's it. Ronan looked at Damien. Damien looked at Serena. That's it, he said. You tell me it's him and you're done. You don't move toward anything. You don't engage anything. Agreed, she said. It took 40 minutes to get to Cortez's consolidated position. A waterfront property in the industrial port district, legitimate on the surface as a shipping import business. The kind of property that had a warehouse facing the water and a main building facing the road, and a lot of space between those two things in which other arrangements could be made. Lena had the layout from a prior surveillance operation, and she walked them through it on a tablet in the back of the vehicle during the drive, pointing out entry points and sight lines and the likely positions of whatever head count Cortez had assembled. Serena sat and listened and looked at the layout and said nothing. She was managing the ribs on a minute-by-minute basis now, the adrenaline doing less work than it had been earlier, and she was tired in a way that had moved past what tiredness usually felt like into something structural, the tiredness of a body that had been in crisis for 12 straight hours and was beginning to query when the crisis would end. She didn't know the answer to that yet. The waterfront property was dark when they arrived, except for 2 windows in the main building and the ambient glow of the dock lights on the water. Ronan parked 3 blocks away, and they came in on foot through a service lane that ran behind the neighboring properties. The 2 men from the warehouse, she'd learned their names in the car, Briggs and Cole, the latter of which gave her a specific unpleasant echo she had to consciously set aside, moved ahead with Ronan while Damien stayed back with Serena at the edge of the service lane where a gap in the fence gave them a sight line to the main building's rear entrance. She could hear the water, the sound of it hitting the dock pilings, irregular, indifferent. When they move Cortez, Damien said very quietly, right next to her ear, Vargas will either be with him or they'll separate to different exits. If you see Vargas, tell me immediately. Don't point, don't move. Say the word and step back from the fence. And if I don't see him, then we find him another way. He paused. But you'll see him. She didn't ask how he knew that. She was starting to understand that some of what Damien said that sounded like certainty was actually something different. Not arrogance, but the result of having made enough correct calculations in enough high-pressure situations that the confidence had been earned granule by granule, each one paid for with something real. The first sound from inside the building came 7 minutes later. Not a shot, not yet. Something harder, more percussive, the sound of an interior door being forced. Then voices, elevated in Spanish and English in a rapid mix that carried the specific texture of people who had expected to be in control of a situation and were discovering they weren't. Then the rear door of the main building opened. Two men came out first, moving fast, checking the immediate space with the practiced urgency of security personnel running a cover pattern. Behind them, a third man, older, a specific heaviness to his movement, someone who was used to being in the center of a formation rather than its edges. Cortez. She didn't know that for certain, but the formation told her. The way the two men in front oriented themselves relative to the third, the invisible geometry of protection, told her. She was watching for someone else. The fourth man came out 30 seconds after the first three. He was hanging back, slightly off the formation, and there was something in his positioning that was subtly wrong. Not quite inside the protected group, not quite outside it. The positioning of someone who had interests that didn't perfectly align with the people around him. The dock light caught his left hand, between the thumb and forefinger. A burn scar, pale against darker skin. "That's him," she said. Quiet, flat, certain. She stepped back from the fence the way Damien had told her to. Damien moved. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not something she had a complete account of because she was not positioned to see all of it, and she'd been told to stay back and she'd meant it when she agreed to that condition. She heard it more than saw it, the compressed, brutal efficiency of people who had been doing this kind of work long enough to operate at a speed that removed most of the space where things could go wrong. There was a shout, a specific impact sound, two more sounds in rapid succession that she identified and set aside. Ronan's voice saying something short and hard. Briggs answering. Then quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after rather than before. Damien came back through the fence gap 3 minutes later. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding freely, and he was holding his right side with one hand in a way that meant something under his ribs was registering a complaint, and his jacket was gone, and his shirt had blood on it that she was fairly certain wasn't entirely his. He looked at her. "Vargas," she said. "Confirmed and handled," he said. "Cortez. Handled." He said it the same way. The same word, the same weight. "It's done." She looked at him. At the blood on his face, the way he was holding his side, the controlled quality of his breathing that told her he was managing pain using the same technique she'd been using for the last 12 hours. The careful, shallow rhythm, the refusal to let the body's objection have a vote. "You're hurt," she said. "I've been hurt before." "That's not an answer." "I know." He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of someone doing something that was not their default mode, he said, "It's manageable. We need to get back to the warehouse. Lena's monitoring the task force movement, and we need to know where they are before we move again." She nodded. She fell in beside him, and they moved back through the service lane, and she could hear his breathing, and she counted the steps and matched her pace to his without drawing attention to the fact that she was doing it, just staying even, just staying beside him. They were 2 blocks from the car when his phone lit up. He looked at it. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him and looked at his face, which had gone through several things in quick succession before arriving at something she recognized as the expression he'd had in the car when he'd been on the phone with Hatch, the expression of receiving information that was restructuring the ground under everything else. "What?" she said. He turned the phone and showed her the screen, a message from Lena. 4 words and a name. Task Force has Daniel. She looked at it. She felt it move through her the way cold moves through something. Not shock exactly, because some part of her had known since she'd read her brother's name on Hatch's laptop that this moment was coming. But knowing something is coming and having it arrive are different experiences, and the difference lived in her chest, right alongside the broken ribs, pressing against them from both sides now. She looked at Damien. "They're going to call me," she said, "through him, using his phone." "Yes. And if I don't answer, they hold him until you do." He held her gaze. "Or they use him as leverage to surface you some other way." She looked at the phone in his hand. The screen had gone dark, but the message was still there, 4 words and her brother's name. The task force's last play in a night that had been built out of nothing but plays, moves, and counter-moves, and the specific human wreckage that accumulated at the intersection of all of them. She had run out of options that didn't cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. "Give me the phone," she said. Damien looked at her. "Serena, give me the phone," she said, and her voice had the same quality his voice had been carrying all night, the voice of someone who had already made the decision and was now simply in the process of executing it. Damien held the phone for one more second. Then he gave it to her. She looked at the dark screen. She thought about Daniel, 31 years old, accountant, girlfriend named Paula, a cat with a stupid name she could never remember, a man who had kept an offer open for over a year even when she kept turning it down, who had left a light on in a metaphorical sense every single time she'd walked away from the exit he kept pointing toward. She thought about what it had cost him to get that call today. Federal agents at his door, or his office, or wherever they'd found him, telling him his sister had been taken by a dangerous man, that she was in over her head, that the only way to help her was to cooperate. She thought about what he'd felt when he heard those words. Because she knew Daniel well enough to know he wouldn't have questioned it, wouldn't have asked for a lawyer or demanded verification, would have just said, yes, tell me what to do, I'll do anything. That was who he was. That was the specific shape of his decency, and they'd used it like a key. She looked at Damien. When I call him, they're listening. Yes. And whatever I say, they'll use to either locate us or build their case. Yes. So what I say has to accomplish two things at once, she said. It has to convince Daniel I'm all right and not being held against my will. Genuinely convince him, not just say the words because he knows me well enough to hear the difference. And it has to not give the task force anything they can use. Damien was quiet for a moment. That's a narrow line. I know. She turned the phone over in her hands. But Daniel has a tells, things he says when he's being coached, when he's nervous, when he's reading from something someone else wrote for him. I'll know if he's being fed lines. And he'll know if I am. She paused. We grew up in the same house. You learn to read each other that specific way. She dialed. It rang once, half of a second ring. Then Daniel's voice, tight and too fast in the way of someone who had been sitting with a phone in their hands, waiting for exactly this sound. Serena. Hey, she said. Just that first. Just the word, light, the way she'd said it 1,000 times. A beat. She heard him recalibrate, heard him hear her, and hear that she wasn't broken, wasn't panicked, wasn't being held at gunpoint in the immediate cinematic sense, and heard him try to figure out what that meant. Are you... He stopped, started again. Where are you? I'm okay, she said. I know you've had a bad day. I'm sorry about that. Serena, they said... I know what they said. She kept her voice even and warm, the specific register she used with him when she was being honest without being alarming. It's more complicated than what they told you. I'm not in danger right now. I'm with people who are making sure of that. A silence. She heard other sounds in the background, the specific quality of a room with more than one person in it, someone shifting weight, the faint sound of something electronic. Daniel, she said, I need you to listen to me really carefully. Not to them, to me. You know how to do that. Another beat. Yeah, he said, quieter, more himself. Yeah, I know how. I'm going to be out of contact for a little while longer, not long. And when it's over, I'm going to come find you and I'm going to explain everything. And you're going to have about 47 questions and I'm going to answer all of them. She paused. But right now, I need you to tell the people in that room with you that you spoke to me and I sounded all right and you're not going to be used as a way to find me. Can you do that? The silence this time was longer. She heard him breathing. She heard him doing the thing he'd always been able to do, the thing she'd relied on since they were kids, sorting through the available information at speed, finding the load-bearing pieces, making a decision. You're sure, he said, that you're okay? I'm sure. The guy they told me about is not what they told you he is, she said. That's one of the 47 questions. I'll answer it. Another pause. Then, very quietly, in a register that meant he'd turned slightly away from whoever was in the room. The cat's name is Rutherford, in case you were ever going to ask. She almost laughed. Her ribs stopped her. Rutherford, she said. That's a terrible name. Paula named him. I had no say. Tell Paula I said hi. Serena, I'll find you, she said. Promise. She ended the call. She stood on the dark street with the phone in her hand and her ribs grinding and the smell of the waterfront 3 blocks behind her, and she held herself very still for exactly 10 seconds. Then she handed the phone back to Damien. He took it. He looked at her face for a moment, reading it. He'll hold, she said. He won't help them find me. You're sure? He's my brother. She started walking toward the car. I'm sure. They made it back to the warehouse without incident, which felt provisional rather than reassuring. The absence of immediate crisis in a night built entirely out of crisis had the quality of a held breath rather than actual safety. Lena was at the table where they'd left her, 3 more windows open on the laptops, and she looked up when they came in, and her eyes went directly to the cut above Damien's eyebrow and the way he was holding his side. Sit down, she said. I'm fine. You're bleeding on my floor, Lena said. Sit down. He sat down. Serena sat down across from him without being told, because the option no longer felt optional. Lena produced a first aid kit from a cabinet under the table, a serious one, the same category as the one in the car from the previous night, and Serena had a brief sideways thought about what it said about a person that they kept serious first aid kits in all their locations. She took it from Lena before Lena could move toward Damien. He looked at her. Let me, she said. Not a question. He held still. She worked methodically. The cut above his eyebrow first, not deep enough to need stitching, but long enough that closing it properly mattered, and she used the butterfly strips from the kit with the careful precision of someone who'd had enough practice with this kind of thing that her hands knew the angles. He didn't move while she worked. He watched her face with those still dark eyes, and she was close enough that she could see the effort in that stillness, the controlled quality of a man who wasn't accustomed to being on the receiving end of this kind of attention and was deciding how to exist inside it. Your side, she said, when she'd finished the eyebrow. It's bruised, maybe cracked. Nothing I can do about it here. I know. She sat back. That's not why I said it. He understood. He lifted his shirt on the right side and she looked at the bruising that was already developing, dark and spreading, the specific pattern of something that had hit hard and concentrated. And she pressed 2 fingers against the worst of it the way she'd learned to check her own ribs, feeling for the give that meant fracture versus the solidity that meant bruise. He drew a sharp breath. Cracked, she said. At least 1, possibly 2. Like yours, he said. Like mine. She sat back. Welcome to the club. The membership benefits are terrible. Something moved in his expression. The crack again, wider this time, and underneath it something that was tired and human and more visible than he'd allowed it to be at any point in the last 12 hours. Serena, he said. Don't, she said. I need to... Don't apologize, she said. Not for tonight. I made every choice I made tonight. You told me I could leave and I stayed, and every decision after that was mine. She met his eyes. What you can do is tell me what happens next. The task force. With Cortez and Vargas gone, does the Ortega organization have enough left to... Without Cortez and Vargas, the financial network collapses, Lena said from the table, not looking up. The Ortega operation in this city ran through those 2 specifically. The product side, what little of it there was, operated independently and will continue to, but the money infrastructure is gone, which means the organization's capacity to fund any kind of coordinated response is gone with it. The street-level people, Ronan said. He'd come back in while she was working on Damien's ribs, quiet as always, taking up his position near the wall. They'll regroup eventually. New leadership, but that takes months, and they're going to be looking inward first, figuring out what happened to their operation. They're not going to be looking at her. And the task force, Serena said. This was the question with the most weight in it, and everyone in the room knew it. Lena took her glasses off her forehead and put them on properly, and looked at her screens. They have a case built over 14 months primarily targeting Damien's operation, with their primary inside source. She glanced at Hatch briefly, who was sitting against the far wall in a silence that had been getting more complete since they'd returned. Compromised and their surveillance targets no longer at any of the locations they've been watching, they have a significant evidentiary problem. What they have is records, movement data, Hatch's testimony. She paused. What they don't have is the kind of active operation that makes prosecution straightforward. That's not the same as gone, Serena said. No, Lena agreed. It's not. Damien spoke. There's a conversation that needs to happen, he said. Not tonight, but soon, with someone in a position to negotiate the parameters of what the investigation looks like going forward. He said it with the careful neutrality of someone who had already thought about this specific problem from multiple angles. I have a contact, someone with enough standing to open that conversation without it becoming an immediate escalation. A lawyer, Serena said. Among other things, she looked at him. And me. What does that conversation look like for me? He held her gaze. You're a victim of a domestic violence situation who was present at a location connected to a criminal investigation without prior knowledge of that connection. Your testimony about Vargas's presence at Marco Reyes's apartment is potentially valuable to the task force's case against the remaining Ortega network. He paused. Properly framed, your cooperation with that specific aspect of the investigation, the Vargas identification, the dates, the details, gives the task force something that isn't Damien, something they can use without the case against him. A trade, she said. A reframing, he said. You have something they want that gives you options you didn't have at the beginning of tonight. She sat with that. The shape of it, what it would mean in practical terms. Lawyers, statements, the careful navigation of what she said and how she said it, and the version of the last year of her life that would become the official record. None of it was simple. All of it was better than the alternatives. Hatch, Damien said. Hatch looked up from the wall. Your daughter, Damien said. What they have on her. I need to know what it is. Hatch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, possession charge from 3 years ago. She was 20 and stupid, and it was a small amount, and it should have been nothing, but they held it and waited, and when they wanted something from me, it became very large, very fast. Give Lena the case number, Damien said. The arresting jurisdiction and the case number. She'll find it. He looked at Lena. Lena nodded once, not making a big thing of it, just acknowledging. Hatch stared at Damien for a long moment. The complicated expression was back, relief and shame, and something else. The something else being the most painful part of it, the part that came from understanding that the person you'd spent 6 months betraying was sitting in front of you making arrangements to protect your daughter. Why? Hatch said. Damien looked at him. Because you made the choice I would have made, he said simply. And because you stayed when I told you to stay, which you didn't have to do. A pause. And because this ends tonight and tomorrow, we all have to figure out how to exist in what's left of it, and that's easier without additional weight. Hatch pressed his fist against his mouth again, the same gesture as in the apartment, and this time he kept it there for a long moment and didn't say anything. Nobody did. The warehouse held them all in its diesel and concrete silence, and the water somewhere outside kept moving the way water moves, without interest in what was happening on the land beside it. And the night continued the slow work of becoming morning. Serena walked to the loading dock door and pushed it open and stood in the gap between inside and outside. The sky to the east had that specific pre-dawn quality, not light yet, not the actual arrival of it, but the first withdrawal of true dark, the sky making a decision about what came next. She could see the water from here, a strip of it beyond the property fence, black and moving. She heard footsteps behind her, unhurried. She knew the particular sound of them by now. Damien stood beside her in the doorway. He was holding his side with one hand, careful and unconscious, the body's instinctive protection of damaged things. They stood there for a while without speaking. I didn't plan for you, he said eventually. I know, she said. When I came to that apartment, it was operational. It was a response to a situation that had strategic implications. I wasn't... He stopped. Started again with the careful precision of someone choosing words in a language they don't usually speak. I don't make decisions based on things I can't quantify. I've spent a long time building a structure that eliminates as many unquantifiable variables as possible. And then I sent you a text, she said. And then you sent me a text, he said. She looked at the water. Are you telling me I was a variable you couldn't quantify? I'm telling you that somewhere in the last 12 hours, the strategic calculus stopped being the primary thing I was running. He said it flatly, without drama, the same tone he used for everything, which meant it landed with the full weight of what it was rather than the diminished weight of something being performed. That's not a comfortable thing for me to tell you. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the water, not at her, his profile in the early pre-dawn gray, the butterfly strip above his eyebrow, the set of his jaw that she'd learned to read like a language over the course of a single terrible night, The specific quality of a man who had just said something true at some cost to himself and was not going to dress it up or walk it back. "I'm not comfortable with it either," she said, "but not for the reason you think." He looked at her then. "I trusted him," she said. Marco. "I trusted him for 8 months, and everything I thought I knew about him was a version he'd constructed for me. My ability to read people has been—" She stopped. "I don't trust my own judgment about people right now. That's the honest version of where I am." "That's fair," he said. "It's not a rejection." "I know what it is," he said. She believed him. She believed him the way she'd been believing things he said all night. Not because he was reassuring or because she was inclined toward trust right now, but because he consistently delivered the truth at whatever cost it carried, and that had its own specific credibility. "What does your operation look like," she said, "after tonight, when the lawyers have the conversation and the pieces settle?" He considered it. "Smaller," he said, "more selective. The security infrastructure side was always the cleanest part. Private intelligence, protection work, problem resolution for people who can't use official channels. That continues." A pause. "The rest of it, the parts that required the kind of infrastructure Cortez was threatening. I've been wanting to move away from those for longer than I've admitted." "Wanting to," she said, "or willing to now?" He looked at her. "Both," he said. "Now." She nodded. She looked back at the water. "I have a job," she said. "I work in logistics management, actual logistics, not the Marco version, for a mid-sized import company. I've been there 3 years and I'm reasonably good at it, and I'd like to go back to it." "You should," he said. "I'm going to need a place to stay while my apartment situation is sorted." "That can be arranged." "Not the penthouse," she said. "No," he agreed, "not the penthouse." She almost smiled. "Not quite." "I'm going to need to see my brother." "Today," he said. "Once Lena confirms the task force has pulled back from his location. Today." She nodded. They stood in the doorway as the sky continued its slow decision toward morning, the water moving, the city somewhere behind them beginning its first sounds of the day, a truck on a distant road, a bird making a preliminary noise about the light. "Damien," she said. "Yes, thank you." She said it simply, not with the weight of everything it covered, the apartment floor, the car, the penthouse, the safe house, the warehouse, the cut above his eyebrow that she'd closed with butterfly strips at 3 in the morning, but with the directness of someone who was done performing what they felt and was just saying it. He didn't say "you're welcome." She hadn't expected him to. He said, "Don't send any more messages to wrong numbers." And the complete absence of humor in his voice when he said it was somehow the funniest thing she'd heard in 12 hours. And this time she did smile, briefly, which pulled at her split lip, and she didn't care. She went back inside. He stayed in the doorway another moment, looking at the water, and then he came back inside too. Lena had coffee. Real coffee, from somewhere, in real cups. And she put one on the table near Serena without comment, and one near Damien's chair, and that small act of ordinary human function in the middle of an extraordinary human night made something loosen in Serena's chest that she hadn't known was still tight. She drank the coffee. She sat at the table across from Damien while Lena worked, and Ronan checked in with calls she didn't fully follow, and Hatch sat against the wall in his diminished silence. And the morning came, as mornings do, without asking anyone's permission. At 7:43, Lena said, "Task Force has pulled back from Daniel Vale's location. He's at his apartment, alone." Serena stood up. Ronan had a car ready 20 minutes later, different from everything they'd used the night before. Clean plates, nothing that connected it to anything. He drove her to Daniel's street and stopped half a block from the building, which she recognized from the dozens of times she'd visited in the 3 years since Daniel and Paula had moved in. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The morning was overcast, but not gray in a bad way. The kind of overcast that diffuses light rather than suppressing it. The world visible without the rawness of direct sun. People walking. A coffee shop across the street with its door propped open, the smell of it reaching her clearly. She looked back at the car. Damien was in the passenger seat. He was looking at her through the window, and she couldn't read his expression from this distance, which was perhaps appropriate. She'd been reading him at close range all night, in the dark, under pressure, and maybe reading him across a normal morning distance on a normal street was a different skill that required different conditions. She raised one hand. Not a wave exactly, more an acknowledgement. He nodded once. She turned and walked toward her brother's building. Daniel opened the door 20 seconds after she knocked, and he looked at her. At her face, her lip, her eye, the borrowed clothes, the wrong-sized boots, and he did what she'd known he would do, which was not ask a single question, which was just step forward and put his arms around her with the careful, specific gentleness of someone who could see that she was damaged and was adjusting for it without being told how. It hurt. The ribs objected catastrophically. She didn't pull back. She held on for a long time. When he finally let go and stepped back, he had the look of someone who was storing approximately 47 questions in an orderly queue and was exercising genuine discipline about not releasing them all at once. "Rutherford is in the kitchen," he said. "I don't want to meet Rutherford," she said. "He has a terrible name. He's a great cat. He's named Rutherford. He doesn't know that." Daniel looked at her. "You're okay." "I'm okay," she said, not performing it, just saying it, and finding that it was true in the essential sense, in the sense that mattered, in the sense that tomorrow and the days after it were going to be navigable rather than not. "The guy," Daniel said. "Careful. The one you were with." "Which one?" she said. He blinked. "Long story," she said. 47 questions, I promised." "Come sit down," he said. "I'll make you something to eat." She followed him into the apartment and sat at his kitchen table, and Rutherford came in from wherever he'd been and investigated her boots with the thorough indifference of an animal who had determined she was not immediately relevant to his interests and was confirming it through direct research. She looked at the cat. He looked at her. She reached down and scratched behind his ear, and he permitted this for exactly 3 seconds before walking away to sit in a square of light by the window, satisfied with whatever conclusion he'd reached. She looked at the square of light. She thought about the night in a way that she hadn't been able to while she was inside it. The totality of it, the arc from kitchen floor to this kitchen table, the distance between those two places measured not in miles, but in whatever unit measured the gap between who a person was and who they became after a night like that. She wasn't going to call it transformation because that was too clean, too complete, too much the language of something resolved, when what she actually felt was the rawness of something that had changed and hadn't finished changing yet. But she was alive. She was at her brother's table, and there was coffee coming, and a cat with a terrible name was occupying a square of light, and somewhere across the city, a man with a cut above his eyebrow and cracked ribs was doing whatever the morning required of him, and none of that had been remotely predictable from any position she'd occupied prior to last night. The wrong number. She'd thought about it in the car, in the warehouse, in the spaces between every other thing, the improbable chain of causation that ran from a shaking hand and a blood-blurred screen to everything that had followed. She didn't assign it meaning beyond what it actually was. A mistake, a misdialed contact, a random collision between her particular crisis and a particular phone. She didn't need it to be more than that. What she did know was that who you reached in the worst moment of your life sometimes came down to a single digit, and that the world did not sort carefully between the numbers you meant to dial and the ones you didn't, and that some of the most significant things that had ever happened to any person alive had started exactly that way. Not with intention, not with design, but with a hand that shook at the wrong second and landed somewhere unexpected. You could spend a long time deciding what to call that. She'd decided to call it Tuesday. Daniel set coffee on the table in front of her and sat down across from her and looked at her face with the patient, careful attention of someone who loved her and was willing to wait for every single one of the 47 questions. "Start wherever you want," he said. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth of it moved into her palms, past the scraped skin, into something deeper. "There was this man," she said, "and I sent him a text by accident." She told him everything. Outside, the city continued the ordinary work of a Wednesday morning. The traffic, the voices, the 10,000 small transactions of people moving through their lives with no idea what had happened in the dark beside them the night before. The sky held its overcast light, even and diffuse, the kind that made everything visible without making anything harsh. 3 months later, Serena was back at her desk. The logistics company had held her position, compassionate leave, they'd called it, after the conversation with HR that she'd navigated carefully with the help of a lawyer whose number Damien had given her and who had asked no more questions than were necessary. Her apartment was gone. She'd let the lease expire rather than go back to it. And she had a new one, smaller, on a street she'd chosen herself, the kind of street where no one knew her name yet, and that felt like freedom rather than loneliness. She had given a statement. The dates, the descriptions, Rafael Vargas's presence at the apartment in the weeks before Marco Reyes disappeared. The task force had received it through channels that had been negotiated carefully, with the kind of precision that required expertise she didn't have and that had been provided by people who did. Her name did not appear in any document that was publicly accessible. Her cooperation in the Vargas identification had given the investigation what it needed to redirect its energy toward the remaining Ortega network, and the thing that had been built around Damien over 14 months had not collapsed but had been reframed, as he'd said, which turned out to mean made considerably less immediate. Hatch's daughter's possession charge had been quietly resolved through a process Serena did not know the details of and did not ask about. Hatch himself had moved to another city, which Serena had heard from Lena in the single conversation they'd had after the warehouse. She found that she harbored less anger about him than she expected. What Ronan had said in the car was probably true. He'd given the task force everything they'd wanted, and they'd have burned him eventually anyway. The fact that Damien had chosen not to added it to the ongoing ledger of things about that man that she was still in the process of accounting for. She saw Damien on Thursdays. Not every Thursday. Not with any formal arrangement. Just Thursdays often. In a way that had started with a coffee and had become dinner and had become the particular shape of something that was taking its time becoming what it was going to be. Neither of them pushing it faster than it was ready to go. Both of them carrying enough damage from enough different sources to understand the value of a pace that left room for truth rather than urgency. He was not easy. She had not expected easy. He was precise and controlled and frequently several steps ahead of whatever conversation they were nominally having, and he had a specific kind of emotional economy that required patience to work around. And there were nights when she looked at him across a table and had the same sensation she'd had that first night, reading a language she didn't fully speak, catching one word in 5. But the ratio was improving, and he tried. That was the thing she kept coming back to, the thing that mattered in the way that small, consistent things matter more than large, dramatic gestures. He tried. He asked questions he didn't need the answers to and paid attention to the answers and adjusted accordingly. And sometimes he said things that were true at genuine cost to himself. And sometimes when she looked at him, she caught that hairline crack, and what she saw underneath it was no longer something she couldn't name. She named it quietly, in her own inventory. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. He wasn't either, probably. They were both the kind of people who'd had the concept of trust broken at enough load-bearing points that rebuilding it was slow, deliberate work, the kind of work you didn't rush because you'd paid too much for the understanding that rushing it made it break again. They had time. On a Thursday in October, 4 months after the night it had started, she sat across from him at a restaurant she'd picked, which was small and unremarkable and served food that was better than its appearance suggested, and she looked at him in the ordinary evening light. No blood, no cut above his eyebrow, no city surveillance sliding past the windows. And she thought about a kitchen floor and a shaking hand and a wrong number. She thought about the 10,000 different digits she could have pressed instead. "What?" he said. He'd caught her looking. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking about how I almost called someone else." He looked at her, the stillness, the dark eyes, the particular quality of attention that she'd thought was coldness on the first night, and now understood was simply the way he looked at things he was treating as important. "I know," he said. "Does that bother you?" she said. "The randomness of it." He thought about it. He actually thought about it, which was something she'd come to appreciate. He didn't answer questions before they were finished, didn't fill space with the first available response. "No," he said. "The randomness is the only part that makes sense to me." She raised an eyebrow. "Everything I build is deliberate," he said. "Every system, every structure, every plan. The things I've gotten wrong in my life have almost all come from believing that deliberate was enough. That if you planned carefully enough, you could eliminate the variables." He looked at her. You were the variable I didn't plan for. That's not something that bothers me. That's the only part of the last 4 months I'm entirely certain about. She looked at him for a long moment. That might be the most words you've said consecutively since the first night, she said. Don't get used to it, he said. She smiled. It didn't pull at her lip anymore. The lip had healed, the way things do, imperfectly and completely, leaving only the faintest evidence that it had ever been otherwise. She picked up her coffee cup. He picked up his. Outside, the city did what cities do. Moved, breathed, carried 10 million separate lives in its currents without awareness of any of them. Indifferent and enormous, and full of the specific accidental collisions that make one life different from the life it would have been otherwise. Serena Vale had learned something in the space of one night and 4 months that she hadn't known how to learn in all the years before it, something she couldn't have been taught because it only came from the inside of experience rather than the outside of it. That survival wasn't the whole point. Survival was the floor, the minimum, the baseline, the thing you fought for when fighting was all there was. But what you built on top of the floor, in the quiet after the fighting stopped, in the ordinary Thursday evenings, and the slow accumulation of small, true things, and the patient work of rebuilding a sense of what was real, that was the actual life. Not the night she'd lived through, what came after. She drank her coffee. Across the table, Damien was watching the street through the window with the expression she now knew was not coldness, but simply attention. The way he looked at things that mattered, and then he turned and looked at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough.